On the morning of October 14, 1993, a woman named Maxine Voss was admitted to the Whitmore Residential Treatment Center in a state of acute psychological distress. She was 31 years old. She had dark hair. She worked as a freelance graphic designer out of a small apartment in Ashford, North Carolina. And up until a few weeks prior, by all outward appearances, Maxine had been living a completely normal life. But something had happened on October 9th that changed everything. Now, before we get into what that something was, you need to understand a little bit about Maxine, because she was not the kind of person who fell apart easily. People who knew her described her as composed, the kind of woman who trusted evidence over emotion and facts over feelings. She kept lists, she kept schedules. She was, in the words of her sister Mara, the most put-together person I've ever known. So when Maxine showed up at a hospital on the night of October 9th, confused and disoriented, unable to account for her whereabouts, the people who loved her knew something was deeply wrong. 5 days later, she was transferred to Whitmore. The Whitmore was a residential psychiatric facility, or in other words, an insane asylum. The building was completely white, so it made everything around it look slightly dirty by comparison. It sat at the edge of Ashford like it had always been there, like it had been waiting. Maxine was placed in the East Wing, room 4, and from the very first day, she had one thing on her mind: finding her sister. Here's where things start to get strange. According to Maxine's own account, she wasn't a patient at the Whitmore, she was a visitor. She had come to the facility looking for her younger sister, Mara, who she believed had been admitted sometime in early October. Every single morning, Maxine would wake up, get dressed, and begin searching the building for Mara. She checked rooms. She questioned nurses. She drew maps of the floor plans in a notebook she carried everywhere, documenting what she described as the building constantly changing, doors appearing where walls had been, hallways that seemed to grow longer overnight, stairwells that shifted from one end of the corridor to the other, and she documented all of it. The staff watched this happen every day and said nothing. That detail is important. Remember it. Dr. Whitfield was Maxine's attending psychiatrist at the Whitmore. He was a patient, quiet man, the kind of doctor who asked a lot of questions and wrote down the answers very carefully. Every session he had with Maxine followed the same pattern. Maxine would tell him about her search for Mara, about the building changing, about the evidence she had gathered, and Dr. Whitfield would listen. And then, at some point in every session, he would ask her the same 2 questions.
What's today's date and what's your name?
Maxine always got it right. And every single time, without hesitation, without doubt, she would look him in the eye and say,
Mara Voss.
And every single time, Dr. Whitfield would write something down in his notes. Maxine noticed this. She documented it in her notebook. She wrote, "He reacts to the name. He knows something. He knows what happened to my sister." And she was right that he knew something. So let's talk about the building for a second. Because Maxine's description of the Whitmore constantly changing, the moving stairwells, the shifting rooms, the doors where walls should be, sounds like someone who is deeply unwell. But here's what's actually interesting about that. Maxine wasn't making it up. She was genuinely experiencing the building as unstable, as shifting, as a place that refused to hold its own shape. And the reason for that, it would later be determined, is that Maxine had been moved twice since her admission, both times during what her medical records called acute episodes. Each time she woke up in a different room, in a different wing, with the same room number. Her mind, trying to hold on to consistency, trying to make sense of the world around her, stitched those rooms together and registered the seams between them as the building moved. The building wasn't changing. Maxine was. There was a woman who worked in the east corridor of Whitmore, a nurse named Patel. Dark hair, dark eyes, and she had a red lanyard at her throat. Maxine had noticed Nurse Patel early on. She wrote about her in the notebook because Nurse Patel quietly watched Maxine through the windows of the east corridor. Every day, Maxine interpreted this as surveillance, as evidence that the staff was hiding something about Mara's whereabouts. She wrote, "They are watching me. They don't want me to find her." But here's the thing about Nurse Patel. She wasn't watching Maxine because she suspected her of anything. She wasn't watching her because she was hiding something. She was watching her because Maxine always looked so certain, so completely, absolutely certain that she was going to find what she was looking for. And Nurse Patel found that hard to look away from. About 3 weeks into Maxine's stay at the Whitmore, something happened. The bathroom at the end of the east corridor, which had been locked since Maxine's arrival, was left open. Maxine had gone in, and above the sink was a mirror. Maxine hadn't looked in a mirror in 14 months. This is documented in her intake paperwork. It was one of the first things the admitting physician had noted as unusual. 14 months without once looking at her own reflection. But on this particular morning she stood in front of that mirror, and the woman looking back at her had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair hadn't been properly cut in almost a year, and around her neck, loosely, almost carelessly, was a red scarf. Maxine reached up to touch it. The woman in the mirror did the same, and that's when Maxine's hand went to her own neck and felt the scarf. She found Dr. Whitfield in the corridor. He was holding a folder. He had been waiting. Inside that folder was Maxine's intake form, her photograph, her name at the top of the page. Patient, Maxine Ann Voss. Age, 31. Date of admission, October 14th. Below that, in the section marked Clinical Notes, a patient was brought in following a psychiatric episode at the site of a motor vehicle accident. The patient's sister, Mara Lee Voss, 28, was pronounced dead at the scene. The patient was the driver. The patient has since demonstrated acute dissociative episodes with identity transference. She has adopted the name and reported the history of the deceased. She refers to herself as Mara Voss. She reports searching for her missing sister Maxine within the facility. The patient shows no conscious awareness of the substitution. On October 9th, Maxine Voss had been driving with her younger sister Mara when there was an accident. Mara was killed and Maxine survived, physically at least, but Maxine's mind could not survive the truth of what had happened. It couldn't hold it, so it did the only thing it could do. It handed Maxine's identity to Mara. It made Maxine the one who was gone, and Mara the one who was still here, still searching, still moving through the world looking for her sister. Maxine had painted Mara over herself the same way you paint a wall, coat after coat, until the original was gone, until even the person doing the painting forgot there was ever anything underneath. And for 3 weeks, Maxine had walked the halls of the Whitmore, searching every room, filling notebooks with maps and evidence and observations, looking for herself. The building wasn't hiding Mara, it had been housing Maxine. Now, you might be wondering about the red scarf. Maxine had written about it early in her stay, a red scarf she found on a windowsill in room 12. She had documented it as evidence of Mara's presence in the building. She had tracked its movements, windowsill, bed, floor near the radiator, as proof that someone was using the room, someone named Mara. When she finally picked it up, she noted it smelled like cedar soap, her soap, not Mara's. She had written it off as contamination from her own proximity, because she needed it to be Mara's. The scarf had been Maxine's the entire time. She had been leaving it in rooms and finding it again, over and over, for 3 weeks. Evidence of a haunting she was conducting on herself, without knowing it. Dr. Whitfield sat with Maxine in the corridor for a long time after she read the intake form. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "Now do you understand?" He said nothing, because he understood that sometimes the most honest thing a person can do is simply stay. Eventually, Maxine spoke. "The building kept changing," she said. "Not an argument, just an observation." Her last one. "You were moved twice," he said. "During episodes. New wing, same room number. Your mind stitched the rooms together and registered the seam as a shift in the building." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said one word.
Maxine.
Not a correction. A beginning. The Whitmore still stands at the edge of Ashford, North Carolina. 3 stories, 36 windows. Maxine Voss spent 7 months there in total. She was discharged in May of 1994. Her discharge notes describe significant progress. Restored identity, integrated grief, a patient who had done the hardest kind of work. The kind where the thing you're looking for turns out to be yourself. She hasn't been back to Whitmore since, but sometimes, in the documentation from her case, in the notebook she filled, the maps she drew, the pages and pages of observations and evidence, you can see exactly the moment the building stopped being a mystery to solve and started being a mirror she was finally ready to look into.